Welcome, and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Charlotte Lee, the Strategic Lead for CX and Innovation at Granicus. Charlotte, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. This is really exciting.
Pleasure to have you. To dive into the topic here, tell me a little bit more about what's working right now in the federal government in this space when it comes to effective CX outreach and communication, and what are some examples of that standing out?
I think that communication and CX has been tied together in industry and in our day-to-day lives for a long time in a way that's very intuitive to us. So if you go to a dentist's office and they want to remind you of something and you forgot about the appointment, oh my gosh, like, thank you, you know? I think that with government and the way that things have been, CX and communications has not been traditionally tied together until very recently. And what I think is working right now is horizontal leadership, right? We're with sort of the emergence of customer experience officers, the executive orders, and the various mandates that are asking of agencies better customer experience. They're looking at every opportunity, and one of those things happens to be communications. And so in our world, we talk about how does it tie together? Well, we separate out the journey of the customer from the four phases of communication, right? Which a lot of people are familiar with. It starts with awareness, and then it goes to trust and consideration, then decision and action, then engagement and management, right? And so when you break down a customer's journey in those four phases, all of a sudden there's really tangible things that can happen to improve customer experience over time. And these leaders who are in horizontal leadership positions are able to tie these pieces together, I think, for the first time in a widespread way.
All right, and those four phases of communication you mentioned, can you go a little bit deeper into that and how it intersects with this sphere of government CX?
I think that in CX world, there is a journey map that happens with a lot of like emotions and things that are processes, right? Like here is a process, and oftentimes government's very used to mapping out journeys and processes. But when we looked at it from the communications lens, we were like, well, on the headline, we talk about the awareness of it all, but what is there to be done tangibly? And so with each of these steps, we talk about proactive and empathetic communication, guiding the journey. One thing is that with modernization and digital transformation, we are talking about huge, CRM updates or, like website updates even. But a lot of times, even if we're working so hard in the background to improve customer experience and user experience, what actually gets communicated is what really matters, right? Like if I don't know about it, I'm not aware of it, did the digital service exist, And then if I am on your website and I'm trusting, or I'm trying to see if I trust or, trust this, what are we doing to help convey that trust, for example? And same goes for decision and action. What is helping people decide to enroll into the program and take the action or convert the action, whatever the desired customer outcome is? And then of course with engagement and management, how are we continuing the journey and not making people strangers at the end of the day? So in that way, we tie CX and communication together.
All right, excellent. One trend that we've been following recently with CX in government is that this push to make sure that all populations are aware of these services, to your point just a moment ago, especially populations that are underserved, have not traditionally been in full participation of these programs in the past. So when it comes to the challenges agencies face identifying these populations, first of all, and then getting them aware of them, and then thirdly, getting them to sign up, where do you see those challenges, and what are some effective strategies to reach out to these populations?
I think with digital transformation as a whole in the last, couple decades, we have an opportunity to do something better than it was, right? It shouldn't be that we make something digitally available and then what we say, like replicate or lift and shift that experience in which here is a form, okay, bye, good luck, with, like at the DMV or, anywhere else you're receiving a government service, you can kind of imagine, right, like what it would be to replicate that experience in a digital form is not it, right? Well, you have an opportunity to do something better. And with digital communications, it's about reaching people where they are, right? And so a lot of times, people are not, people change their physical addresses more often than email addresses. Same goes with phone numbers too. So a lot of increasing accessibility comes from, anywhere, anytime, right? So SMS has been very critical, email has been very critical, especially if you think about not just underserved, but at-risk populations who may be experiencing unhousing, who may be, under protection from abuse situations. Or if you think about these scenarios, it's not simply whether I'm reaching a certain demographic or not, it's reaching someone in their life events. And they are experiencing government at the same time they're experiencing these life events. So I think that digital communication is the minimum we should be considering in terms of serving underserved communities.
To look at this another way, obviously, when you're talking about the life experiences, a lot of times these are people trying to sign up for a service when they're going through a difficult time, when they have multiple things going on, and this is just one small piece of it. And obviously, navigating the bureaucracy of agencies can be challenging. So with that said, Charlotte, what more can agencies do to reduce the burden of these people when they are, one, trying to find out what's out there, and two, sign up for these services?
Yeah, I think this is where empathy really kicks in. When I think about burden reduction, and I think that I think about my parents and being young growing up and watching them as immigrants navigate the government, right? It wasn't even so much taking the action or doing the thing that was burdensome. It was everything around it, right? So I think that one of the reasons I'm so passionately out there about CX and communications is because it alleviates anxiety, and it alleviates the burden of knowing. I remember many times trying to settle in the US, my parents would be so happy to find out that there was some program to help receive school enrollment, help, right? And I remember things like in my Korean community finding out about WIC or SNAP benefits, right? And then the community having to share it together between the networks. Now with digital transformation and the translation, transformation and the translations that's available, I see things come from Fairfax County Public Schools, for example, in Korean. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if they only had this. And so what I'm talking about is the invisible burden that is really alleviated by proactive, empathetic communication throughout the journey. And this has very little to do with the transformation itself. These things can happen concurrently to the modernization or the digital service delivery. And even if it's not a complete digital experience, having more communications helps create or remove the idea of mistrust. And I think that's sort of the second part of this is when I am considering, and I have considered if I should apply, there's a fear in knowing, should I be giving this information? Do I really want to, have that decision and action phase, right? And in that phase, in that moment where someone is deciding to either take the action or enroll into the program, have we said anything that might change their minds or help guide their journey or manage their expectations that would result in the behavior? And I think that the number was $40 billion in unclaimed benefits from government. And I think that that's a really huge number to think about why people wouldn't be enrolling and receiving the services entitled to them.
Yeah, I think you raise a really interesting point. This is something that we've heard OMB talk about, we've heard other agencies talk about this, is that these interactions with customers, they are make or break opportunities, that if it goes well, it builds trust in government. If it doesn't go well, it goes back to that point about mistrust, fear, not knowing, what the data will be used for. In terms of the mistrust side of things, what more can agencies do to kind of assuage those fears if they're out there, or bust myths of things if there are fears of like, oh, I don't want my data to be used for this, that, or the other. What are some good housekeeping principles there?
I think that we all in the CX community talk about CX building trust. What is it? What does it mean for it to have trust? And it could be in terms of security. It could be in terms of the consideration, as we talked about, or it could be the interaction altogether. But I think with trust is built with transparency, right? Even in our personal lives, like how do you build trust with someone? And when you think about transparency, there's a lot that goes on in the government world about transparency. And I think that's really the next sort of vertical to like tackle around like how government is proactively being transparent with the customer in mind. Because we've been like very good about sharing information, but sometimes it's in bulk, so people can't access it, right? But when we talk about transparency, to me, transparency is meaningful communication, right? So I feel like trust is built with transparency, which is meaningful communication. And that is something that, as we think about the development of applications of digital experience, we should consider what about these unseen parts of the journey that don't start at the website, that don't start assuming awareness, that don't start assuming someone has the time, the capability, and the comprehension to get through it, even if they decide to do it, right? So I think there's just a lot to be done, but it's actually very intuitive if you think about it in our day-to-day lives.
Mm-hmm. Charlotte, all great points. We're going to stay with this after the break. I'd like to thank today's guest, Charlotte Lee, the Strategic Lead for CX Innovation at Granicus. I'm your moderator, Jory Heckman, on excellent, equitable, and secure customer experience, a closer look at high-impact service providers, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Network. Welcome back to Excellent, Equitable, and Secure Customer Experience, a closer look at high-impact service providers, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Network. My guest today is Charlotte Lee, the Strategic Lead for CX and Innovation at Granicus. I'm your moderator, Jory Heckman. And Charlotte, diving back into the conversation where we left things, we were talking about some of the ways that there can be burden reduction when it comes to CX. To take another look at that, what steps are federal agencies taking when it comes to meeting their customers where they are, kind of bridging that gap a little bit, and ultimately delivering those simple, seamless, secure services?
I think that right now agencies have a lot of technology, right? They have a lot of assets that they've accumulated in terms of tools and websites, or a lot of like assets that have been acquired that if applied, if we can apply strategy to them, right? And use the data that we already have from those things and create a persona that we are responding to based on the assets and data we already have, we might have a quicker outcome that is measurable in terms of what the customer actually experiences at the end of the day. I think that we have put it's not just when we started talking about CX, it's for decades that government has tried to effectively meet people where they are. There's programs, around any device, right? Like you should be able to do, and the mobile friendliness. And I think there's been a lot of attempts so far in doing that. But honestly, since the time that I've started thinking about CX and communications together, those are things that we already have access to. And so I would just say that because there's so many brilliant people working on CX right now who don't have a lot of resources, who may be feeling like we're not going to be able to make any impact or meaningful impact for a really long time or without any money, I would just ask them to think about what are the ways in which we can apply strategy to the assets and the data that we have and already have and understand about our current customer, rather than seeking new information and new data and sort of starting from scratch. when it comes to CX.
Yeah. Well, if there's anything I've taken away from these conversations in the past, it's been that, this is a multidisciplinary thing, CX, that it is the technology, it's the people, it's process, it's everything and more on top of that. With that being said, what should agencies be paying the most attention to when it comes to measuring success, meaningful impacts, meaningful improvements in CX?
I think when you tie CX and communications effectively, you might be able to connect it with mission outcomes, which is what CX leaders really need. So in an example, when we work with agencies and they use SMS or email to do outreach, the impact of that can be directly translated to how many people showed up to receive vaccinations or signed up for this program or was able to make the deadline. There was work that we've done with Medicaid unwinding and open enrollment we do every year that really suggests measuring the communications metrics. For example, subscriber rates, click rates, and open rates start to link together with how relevant are we? How many people find what we say important and interesting and are engaging with it, right? The idea of engagement. That analytical side of communications has been around for a while and impacts us all the time with and what happens is when you start measuring things like that, you can actually start to segment the population, all right? Like these people have or haven't engaged with our communication. So perhaps we can do a more customized or personalized approach that would reach them. And over the last 10 years, as we work with CMS, we find that extremely effective, as it would be, right? People are more likely to open a personalized email and they don't think it's, creepy. I think people, I think when we think about personalization, we get like a little spooked by that. But I think that society has kind of caught up to the expectation in which now we expect it to be personalized. Like, why are you sending me this? This has nothing to do with me. Like, why can't you remember me and who I am and what I said I needed and send me, relevant communication? So I think that tying the communications and the CX metrics will be revealing to being able to deliver the service with more strategy and accuracy over time.
And Charlotte, to get a little more existential with all things CX, obviously this is a mandate from the administration on down to agencies for them to get better with this. We've seen the executive orders, we've seen the guidance out from OMB on this. But in terms of the value proposition to agencies, because they have a lot of things they have to worry about. They have to worry about legacy IT, which is part of this. They have to worry about cybersecurity, which is part of this. But like this, feeds into all these things and more. But what is ultimately the return on investment for agencies to get CX right, as opposed to spending this time and attention elsewhere across their mission?
I think that earlier we had discussed this idea of trust. It seems like a nice to have, but when there is a crisis and you need people to listen, you're going to want them to listen. And right now we live in a very interesting era of information, and part of government's primary roles is to be the conveyor of the most accurate and most guiding information, right? So when you build trust over interactions and they trust you and you have something to say, for example, if you're part of a disaster relief organization or disease prevention, there is times when you're going to really need that trust. Other times you really need that trust is when the program itself gets scrutinized and we question the efficacy of it. And the people who have been receiving services either from the agency or the department of the program don't trust it, so they will not defend it, right? And so you're going to want to have built up that trust over time. That is our definition of loyalty, right? Like in commercial world, we talk about like customer retention and all these things, but that's not the way to think about it, right? In government, it's more important than ever to have customers who interact and decide to trust you. And so trust is the number one thing I think is the ROI for so many reasons deeper than it's just people should trust them, right? It's that we need people to. And then the second part of this is operational excellence, right? A lot of times it's just good business in the commercial sector, right? I don't like making direct translations, but sometimes the analogy itself helps. So it's not meant to be like a direct translation, but the analogy of it. And so when you have, when your agency decides or your organization decides to invest in customers' experience, oftentimes than not, it is investing in operational excellence. What is making it inefficient or clunky or burdensome along the way? And I think that in the era of digital channel shifting, this is really important. Adding another channel actually increases the risk of more complication, right? Like now I have to make sure between the brick and mortar and the website and the pamphlet and the mobile and this other application across, as you add these digital channels, we have to manage the change. And it oftentimes, thinking about it through the customer's lens will prevent that. While there is the idea of digital channel shifting, there's also an idea of change management. And I think that using communications and CX together in the change management lens, the operational excellence lens, and the trust lens will be high outcomes. I guess one example I can give is very intuitive. If you send me a proactive text message about the status of my application, I likely won't call you at the call centers, right? And so with digital channel shifting, I think we're going to have to lean a lot on digital communications.
Yeah, well, I think that makes a lot of sense. Charlotte, we've covered a ton of ground here, but is there any takeaways you want to leave with our audience before we close things out here?
In 2023, we sent 150 million text messages from the federal government, and we sent about 12 billion emails from the federal government just in our sort of purview. That is enormous. And I think that when you tie it together, is it worth it? Should we be sending all that information? All we can think about is our day-to-day experience. Would you rather be over-communicated with or under-communicated with, right? So I think we're asking that we consider the proactivity of communications as a key factor in CX and change transformation management over time, rather than making it the afterthought and only seeing it as these accumulated numbers.
Well, Charlotte, thanks again for sharing all your thoughts on this really important topic. Thanks again to today's guest, Charlotte Lee, the Strategic Lead for CX and Innovation at Granicus. I'm your moderator, Jory Heckman, and you're listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search HISP. That's HISP.